Okay, everyone, welcome back. Our next speaker is Rodger Whitehead from version 1. He is the advisory services lead for the UK. And now that we've got Kubernetes covered, Rodger's going to talk to us about PaaS, Platform as a Service. So, over to you, Rodger.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk really about PaaS concept, strategies, and futures. And for those who aren't familiar with PaaS, we're going to do a little bit of introduction as to what it is. We're going to talk about how you can leverage it and how you can actually make the most out of it, and then also give you an understanding of where it's actually going. So a little bit about version 1. If you're not familiar with version 1, we're a systems integrator, around about 1,300 people, and we work with both with all of the major cloud vendors, including Microsoft, Oracle, and AWS. And do a lot of integration across those different spaces, a lot of mixed deployments across that. Number of offices across both UK, Ireland, and also India. And we also have a very large office there in Belfast as well. So hopefully some of you may know of version 1 already. If not, why not get yourselves introduced? Really, just in terms of what PaaS actually is, really the basic concept of PaaS is really platform as a service, and the emphasis really there is on those two words of platform and service. PaaS is very different to infrastructure as a service that you may be used to from third-party data centers, in that platform really as a service, or PaaS or iPaaS, depending on the variation you're referring to. It's very much around having a capability that gives you a certain kind of either business service or technology service. But the key difference is, unlike IaaS, where you're paying for something that's running for the time that the server is actually running and stood up, maybe 24/7, with PaaS, you're only really paying for it on some kind of metered basis. So you're paying for what you use, whether that's by request, by execution time, by the number of messages that you pass to it. There's a number of different ways in which you're actually using that capability and that capacity. So very often that requires you thinking about things in a different kind of way. So it's not just about how you operate it, it's really more about what benefits you actually get from it. And very often people think that PaaS is actually all about public cloud. Well, PaaS can actually mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. So you have to be a little bit careful in terms of the definitions of PaaS that you might be using, because it's really a question of how you consume it rather than where it necessarily comes from. So many more specialist vendors with software specialist platforms for accounting and maybe local authority orientated or public sector, often those can be provided as PaaS, but actually underneath there are a whole combination of lots of different services. So PaaS can be public, private, it can be hybrid. It really is a question of, therefore, how you're using it. And it can extend across a number of different platforms, including computing platforms, web applications, business applications, social media applications. So think of PaaS really as a way of helping you build your final solution. It can be the majority of that solution, but it may also just be a small element of it. Typical examples are things in the Microsoft Azure space, such as SQL Azure, Azure Service Bus. AWS has RDS for database services, or Lambda for service execution, or even things like the Google App Engine. And there are equivalents across all the other clouds for Oracle and a whole range of other more specialist kind of clouds. So PaaS is really all about understanding what it is you actually need from it, and then consuming that capability, and then making sure you're paying for it in a way that's cost effective. So as I mentioned, PaaS is really more a consumption and responsibility model. And you may have seen this diagram here before. But if we go from left to right, you've really got your on-premise third-party data center hosting on the left-hand side, where you basically look after everything, or someone looks after it for you. You then move through the more traditional infrastructure as a service that many of you may be familiar with if it's your first sort of ventures into various types of public cloud, where the vendor looks after the virtualization, the server, the networking, the storage, and so on, and then you do all the operating system, very much as you might do on-premise. There's then quite a major shift when you move from platform as a service to software as a service, in that rather than you looking after everything, the vendor looks after the majority of the solution. And there's often quite a gray area between what is PaaS and what is SaaS in that situation. But generally with a PaaS platform, the cloud vendor looks after everything for you in terms of the operating system, all the infrastructure, all the underlying middleware. So the key thing really with PaaS is you don't necessarily need to know or even to care where that service is running from, as long as it matches your requirements. So really what you're focused on is that application and that data layer at the top there, and understanding what that means and how you can get the most out of it. Typically, software as a service tends to be a more complete solution that you would pay for it as a per user or a per sort of measurement mechanism, but platform as a service usually is the one that's used to build many things. So actually you'll find PaaS components in software as a service, and sometimes vice versa. So really it's focusing on those top two layers around applications and data and what you need from them. And in terms of future directions, everything is moving right. So all of the vendor solutions, all of the things are moving towards platform as a service or software as a service. Infrastructure as a service is really only going to be running for those specialist or legacy applications that are either unable to move or for data security or other reasons can't move to those right-hand sides. So the direction of travel very much is PaaS and SaaS as far as all the major cloud vendors are concerned. What are the advantages of PaaS? Well, the key advantages really are there's no procurement. There's no CapEx kind of life cycle model that you need to follow in terms of buying expensive infrastructure and looking after it and servicing it and so forth. There's no real operational overhead other than making sure that you're getting the most out of the service. And the key thing really therefore, as I mentioned before, is focusing therefore on what your business need is, what you have now, what's your requirement, what's your service level that you're looking for, and how do you achieve that? You don't have to worry about software patching or upgrade responsibility, and that's a double-edged thing because you need to move at the velocity of the cloud vendor, but you don't have to worry about patching and upgrade and all of that. Generally speaking, there's a fairly predictable cost model, and it's usually based on volume of use or volume of consumption or the way in which you execute things or the length of time you execute for. It's designed to be easy to consume, so it's done through configuration, and you can enable services quite quickly. It's scalable and available either at a national level or even a global level, depending on the service. And the key thing here is focusing on your business functionality and not having to worry too much about the operational aspects, because that's now the cloud vendor's responsibility. A lot of organizations aren't necessarily totally comfortable with that at first, but it's something really you have to understand and have to focus on. It's what are you getting out of it that's the key, as opposed to how necessarily it's being run for you. What's key really with PaaS is it's very much orientated towards low code or reduced coding approaches where you're leveraging platforms, bringing those capabilities together. And if you're looking to do more innovative approaches or you're looking to move to more agile kind of ways of delivery and more iterative ways of delivery and delivering solutions very quickly, which obviously in the current context has become increasingly important, it can allow you to bring those things into production much more quickly than some more traditional approaches have done previously. So if you don't have to care about the underlying infrastructure and where the servers are and whether there is a server, what are the things you do need to worry about? Well, you need to understand what your future scale is and your performance is to make sure that you actually have the right capacity there and the provision that you're looking at. You need to understand how the service is actually going to be charged for and how it's going to be billed. Now, with some services, that can actually get quite complicated, particularly if you've got multiple services working together. But you need to at least have an idea of what's driving the cost model that you're about to use. You need to understand where your data is located and the resilience of that from a recovery and data restoration perspective. And you may also need to understand that from a data compliance and a security perspective because of GDPR and where that data is actually being processed. Often PaaS services can run in multi-regions, so you need to understand where that data is transiting through, particularly when those services are new. Typically, PaaS services tend to originate in the host country of the vendor, which is predominantly the US, and then move out to other regions. So you need to understand where that data and those services are being provided from. What's key also is understanding your service SLAs. So what's your support agreement? What does it cover you for? What's the uptime? What does that mean? That may be different to what you have. Therefore, there may be a gap there that you need to understand how you bridge. Data compliance and security we've mentioned. Key in this really is the level of organizational change that you do need to think about. How do I support these new PaaS services? What are the skill sets I need? Do I have the right organizational structure and culture to work in this way? You know, can I cope with not being able to physically see those services running in front of me? And finally, if you're looking to bring those services together, you need to understand how to integrate them together. Where's the data transfer? Where is that data moving? Bear in mind also, if you're moving to PaaS services, typically most cloud vendors will charge you for data that's exiting from their particular cloud platform. So that's a key thing if you're moving lots of data into reporting services or data integration. Some cloud vendors, not all, will charge you for that data egress, as it's known, that's coming out of those data centers. So something definitely to think about and to understand, particularly from an architecture point of view, if you're building these services and these solutions. PaaS isn't perfect, then there are a lot of things that you need to think about, some limitations. And a lot of the limitations, however, are really more when you're actually on that migration journey, moving from an existing on-premise platform or an existing solution to PaaS. And it's really about making sure you can change the organization and understand what it means for you as an organization. So very often there's a perception that PaaS means you're losing operational control because you're no longer really running those servers, you're rerunning the service that runs on top of them. And a lot of organizations, traditional IT stakeholders, tend to perceive that as losing operational control. You need to really look at it from a different perspective and look at it in terms of what it's actually giving you and what you're gaining by not having to worry about those more commodity operational aspects. There is often integration and governance complexity. You need to understand all the best practice and how those services run and how to work best with them. If you're moving particularly legacy solutions to PaaS, very often you need to look at re-architecting that solution and understanding how you can move that to PaaS. And often that structure and that existing mechanism may not be compatible with PaaS, so you need to understand what that actually means. There's often a strong perception that PaaS means a form of vendor lock-in, that by moving to PaaS, it's very hard to sort of extract yourself. That can be true if you're moving to more specialist platforms and if you have a very large volume of data. So you need to understand what it is you're actually investing in. Is it a commodity service that just happens to be running on that particular platform, or is it something more specialist like an Oracle or a SaaS or a Dynamics 365 or a specialist platform that's sort of leveraging the benefits of that cloud it actually currently sits in? So you do need to understand that as to what that vendor lock-in actually is going to be. One of the key elements also, though, is that very often if you move to one of those types of platforms, the PaaS vendor will decide the pace of the upgrade and the pace of change on that platform. As they bring out new features, new upgrades, new mechanisms, you will need to keep up with the pace of that particular change. And that can often be an issue for many service and solution providers and solution developers, in that they're constantly having to upgrade and they're constantly having to make sure that they do regression testing to make sure they work with that. Typically on a PaaS platform, you can't be more than 1 or 2 versions behind the very latest release version. So that is something that you need to think about. It isn't simply a deploy it and forget about it for 3 years. You need to keep looking at it and keep understanding what that actually means. Data security and regulatory compliance, GDPR, you need to have a really good understanding from your cloud vendor as to how compliant they are, what their accreditations are, where that data is actually going to live, and whether you can meet your own audit and regulatory compliance requirements from it. As I mentioned, the organizational change can be quite significant, in that you're now having to rely on other third parties to manage that. That may mean changes to your own support arrangements. You also need things like enhanced connectivity, and you need a different kind of approach to the security of that. So the traditional kind of boundary approaches of security, whereby everything's within the same location, PaaS breaks those boundaries, and your organization becomes quite porous, therefore, in terms of technology and data that's moving across it. And finally, one of the things that often gets overlooked with PaaS is really about how do you bring back a solution once it fails? If you've got multiple PaaS solutions running in multiple locations, particularly if you have a multi-cloud approach, and we'll talk about multi-cloud in a minute, you need to be able to bring that system back to give you a whole solution that has the right state and the right data and the right spaces and at the right time. And that's definitely something you need to think about. So traditional backup and recovery scenarios don't always apply in a PaaS context. You need to think about how you can use the vendor solutions and the vendor options to achieve that. Moving forward, you need to also think about what are the options that you might need to do in terms of single and multi-cloud. So single and multi-cloud in a PaaS context has a particular meaning. You need to think about what that means for you. It's not always an easy choice or an easy option. There can be different ways of going about it. Single cloud, you've got reduced governance and skill set. You only have to focus on having the PaaS skill sets for one particular cloud, whether that's Azure, Oracle, AWS, or Google. Also, you need to understand whether you've got what kind of cost model you want to run. The more you invest in one cloud, the more cost optimization you tend to get in terms of volume discounts and reserved instances, or greater sort of volume. You can often get discounts from the vendors. Obviously, you've got reduced integration. You can have a better sort of security model because you've got less attack surface to look at. There is this concept of vendor lock-in, but it really very much depends on what of those services you're actually going to use from that particular vendor. Multi-cloud, on the other hand, does give you those options. You can go best of breed. So if you want to have SAP, Salesforce, Oracle, Azure, all in your own organization, you can do that as well. Often multi-cloud is adopted because people want to spread their risk across multiple vendors and don't necessarily want to be beholden to one particular vendor. Multi-cloud can give you that. You can balance off the risk, obviously, from a disaster recovery perspective, potentially, or if you want to go in different regions with different vendors where they don't have a cloud data center, particularly, you can do that as well. If you go multi-cloud, you're automatically being forced to a more portable solutions that you build. So you can't necessarily exploit all the innovation and the transformation capabilities of some of those specialist vendors. So there's a trade-off there that you may want to consider. In terms of the complexity and the governance and the resourcing demand, there is also a need to understand what that really means for you. If you're managing multiple clouds, you need to understand all the security and the training and everything that goes with that particular cloud, and what are the skill sets that you need to have with that. So it's a balance, and it really depends on how you as an organization choose to run your solutions, who supports them, who manages them, as to whether that's the right approach for you or not. So you're thinking about going on that PaaS journey. What are the strategies that you need to leverage that sort of future potential for PaaS? Well, firstly, you need to change the organizational culture and embrace the model of PaaS. Accept that it's a service. Accept that you can only control directly certain parts of it, but then move to that more kind of service management mentality. Adopt that service broker idea in that you are working with the various cloud vendors to get the maximum capability of that service that it offers you. To get the most out of PaaS, you just need to understand what you currently have. What are your requirements? What are the service levels that you need? What are those non-functional requirements? What's the cost model that you're willing to accept? If you implement PaaS badly or not in the right way, you can actually get some quite significant sort of cost shock if you're not used to it. So you need to understand at the beginning how you're going to use it, where you're going to use it, and typically often when you move integration solutions from on-premise to cloud, you have to understand that if the majority of your integration was previously running within the IT boundary of your organization, it's now going to be up and down from the cloud. You need to understand what those kind of things mean as well. So you need to understand your current scenario. You need to, if you're going to leverage PaaS, be able to architect and design properly for it. So you need to have those loosely coupled architectural design scenarios, service design principles, service-oriented architectures, APIs, microservices. All of those concepts are things that work well with PaaS. You need to be looking at decoupling presentation, application layer, data tiers, all of the good architecture best practice, and running everything through APIs. So pretty much every cloud vendor now does everything through APIs, including consumption and management. You need to be thinking in those terms with your solutions to be able to leverage that going forward. You need to focus on those industry standards and the best practice and architect for reuse. So rather than simply having another instance of a PaaS platform for each application, try to architect in a way that allows you to reuse the same PaaS platform, maybe with different configuration and different channels, but try to reuse rather than run in parallel. And you often find there's a lot of cost advantages with doing that. You need to adapt and upskill the organization, both the technical aspects, but more importantly, the business aspects as well, because not everything will therefore be under your control, but you'll get a lot of benefits by using cloud services that may outweigh those. So there's an education process for the organization. You must really own your own governance, security, and strategy behind how you use PaaS. It's very hard to leverage PaaS if you're outsourcing a lot of your governance and your security and a lot of your design and your architecture. It's hard for you to move that sort of strategy forward. You need really to keep up with the changes and the nature of PaaS platforms, to be incorporating lots of automation and agile methodologies, to be able to increment and regression test and rapidly deliver those newly upgraded solutions. And if you haven't got those skill sets across a lot of this, there's no harm in partnering where you need to for specialist skill sets or for specialist things. As long as you retain that overall direction, often engaging with multiple partners across different spaces is the right way to go. So really, in terms of finishing off really this talk, where is PaaS heading? Well, as I mentioned before, that the direction of travel is PaaS and SaaS. There are a couple of key trends that are driving that. You may have had people talking earlier on in the session around Kubernetes and containers and virtualization. Increasingly, applications are getting more granular. You can deploy them in smaller pieces. That is driving PaaS as well, because the PaaS is fundamental to a lot of those solutions, whether that's actually running the containers themselves or actually providing that capability. Serverless processing, such as Azure Functions or AWS Lambda, is also driving the move to PaaS, because you're only executing for the time that you need it, gives you rapid scaling. And those low-code, no-code platforms we mentioned, like Power Apps and Teams and various other development style environments, like build those solutions very rapidly. All of that really is driving a decomposition, if you like, of the traditional concept of a server. So increasingly the cloud vendors are building storage arrays, networking arrays, GPU, CPU arrays. No longer is this concept of an individual server that you have and you own that's yours. You're sharing time of that capability, and that is driving more and more of these PaaS style platforms. It therefore is really a question of thinking about how you assemble those solutions back together to give you that right solution. So really PaaS and SaaS are the future direction of many cloud vendors. You need to understand what that means for you, and it may not be the right choice. It depends what you have. But you need to also accept that there won't be nominated servers. It's all about leveraging the capability, leveraging that benefit that you can have. So that was a very rapid run through, really, what PaaS is, some of the strategies, some of the concepts, and some of the future directions that it's heading in. Obviously, if you want to know more, I'm more than happy to talk to you from version 1 perspective. I'll be on the panel later on as well if you've got any questions that relate to that also. So that's it from me. Back to the studio.